racing action. So over here, welcome to our second sprint reaction to the second sprint race out of the 6, of course, races that we have in the 2026 FI Formula 1 season. As you can see on this super innovative 3D Formula 1 calendar, also behind me on that classical 2D Formula 1 calendar. So we are here in the city, obviously, of the beautiful sunshine, the turquoise, Caribbean colors, so to speak, that we absolutely love how the circuit looks like. And obviously here we will bring you the sprint reaction to what turn out to be very, very interesting telling race. But I think we have to talk about the genuine feelings from the Ferrari fans, because of course we had a whole month without the racing action, and now finally after 2 races where we were only racing virtually, we are back with the Apple. Formula 1 is back, and it will be interesting to see what happens throughout the whole Grand Prix weekend. Lots of changes. Some of them we obviously discussed in the race introduction. In a hot lap, we told you, how to race, the cars. You could see it on a red hot lap. But of course, now the cars are a little bit different, and so is the pecking order. So why is that? Well, lots of changes happen. When the checkered flag has flown in Suzuka at the end of March, and when the checkered flag, obviously then, or when the lights went green, here at the Miami International Autodrome at the beginning of May. So as you know, the free practice 1 was extended over here from 60 to 90 minutes because you only have one sole free practice session, not 3 of them. And obviously the cars had to be adjusted in a way. For example, the battery deployment works, in the way the harvesting works, so lots of, different changes, obviously, that were meant to improve the quality of the show, right? Because of course, Miami, the track layout, as you can see on these lovely calendars, I think does allow for some great racing. So going especially into the sprint, and you probably could have seen, when I was sprinting it, when I was fighting it with my very own championship contenders in that concurrent 2025 season, when I went wheel to wheels, obviously, with the Red Bull villain and, with the boy from the Silver Arrows. It was just a fantastic, great pulsating race. So me, of course, also Angel, Amy, everybody, we were really looking forward to this race. As obviously, as Scuderia Ferrari, we would love to win here, for the very first time in Miami, as obviously I will still be chasing that second Miami victory, and again, in a sprint. I love the sprint format, right? So as in the SQ1, you have to use the medium tire. Same for the sprint qualifying 2. For sprint qualifying 3, you put on the mediums, just like you had pretty much for the past couple of seasons. That qualifying is very important, because you only have 1/3 of the race, 100 instead of 300 kilometers. So you don't have lots of opportunities to actually go ahead and, of course, overtake, right? If you are, for example, there in the back. The biggest surprise, of course, was that Mercedes-Benz was not on the pole position, but it was McLaren, the unfashionable orange team, powered by the Mercedes engine, that surprisingly, emerged as the top team over here. And that's a big surprise, because obviously we do know that they are the champions from the past 2 seasons, but the fact that they were able to make an even bigger jump than us, because again, remember, we were actually able to out-qualify, one Mercedes-Benz over here with Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton disappointingly, obviously, in 7th at the end of the sprint qualifying. But still, the fact is that, both McLarens that usually would be behind are now in front. So, this has been the recurring team pretty much since the Michael Schumacher's years, right? And we are always there, but always, there's always somebody, in front of us. And if we manage to get in front of somebody, there's somebody who jumps, even ahead of maybe both of us. So this is definitely something that we have to think about. But again, the race weekend is long, so we're still keeping a lot of the hope, of finding more pace, even though more pace should really come in June with the new directive, to make sure that obviously we don't only find with Mercedes now, McLaren's as well, and the Red Bull is also, surprisingly appearing there. So when you have a starting grid of, obviously Norris putting it on the pole position, and, you having then the Antonelli there with Piastri, Leclerc 4th, then having Verstappen, Russell with, obviously, Lewis Hamilton only in 7th, that was disappointing. Because of course Miami also features very short straight, right? You are basically right in the middle of the Hard Rock Stadium, so football field that's really 100 meters, so that's not very short run to the first turn, which is where we can be the strongest in the race. But again, I would think in Miami it will be even easier with 2026 cars to overtake. But boy, I was wrong. And in this race reaction, we will tell you why. Nevertheless, if the FIA would adopt my format, obviously, of awarding the sprint points over here, they would find out, just how much more exciting you could race. You could make a relatively dual sometimes races like this sprint, for example. Interesting. Why is that? Because of course, looking at the points, you will see that the positions will have a lot of repercussions, and even that fight between Leclerc and obviously Piastri, could, for example, bring Leclerc to the lead of the sprint championship, believe it or not, right? Which looking at the drivers' championship, you would wonder how is that possible. Well, how is it possible? When the 5 red lights went out, obviously on a beautiful, glorious, Miami sunshine, even though not as glorious as obviously the sprint qualifying, us also sporting that new Macarena wing, that can really rotate and provide you with very low drag, which of course Red Bull already managed to copy. That's one of the disadvantages, right? You're having 1 month, some of the teams will add up some of the concepts. We were looking like, solid to at least when we get in front of the cars, that we were able to keep them there. But usually in the races, it will be us against the Mercedes. But of course, in Japan, the McLaren was thrown into the mix because they managed to figure out how to start. They had a decent start. Again, Red Bull, of course, put off the line, but especially Mercedes with Antonelli really struggling. So that gave Leclerc a great chance as the 5 red lights went out, to slot in right behind the unfashionable orange cars. And that's pretty much, where his race was on. Lewis Hamilton did a great job, but sadly he met the old nemesis with whom he shared that memorable 2021 title fight, Verstappen, who just is terrible wheel-to-wheel, banging wheels with Clapinto, banging wheels over there with Hamilton going over the curb, where I, for example, spun during the practice, where you cannot go over the curb that much, but because he pretty much went, right in the middle of it, then he was able, to get away with it right there in front of the Hard Rock Stadium. Could have been a nasty crash. Got lucky with Pinto experience of Hamilton, man, they didn't crash. But yeah, it meant that Lewis was obviously 6th. And actually, very quickly, setting the fastest lap, honing in on the Mercedes boys, who with Antonelli and Russell running 4th and 5th, were actually not looking strong. And throughout the sprint, they pretty much look like the 3rd fastest team. Hamilton obviously, had some look at his former teammate Russell, and just like did Leclerc, who was, kind of having a look at Piastri. But what happened with this new, obviously technical regulations, some of the tweaks, is that, it became a procession race. So I think, this is a real pity, because what was exciting, was that, you were able to overtake, not that you were able to follow, but not able to overtake, right? So let me know what you think about it. Obviously, you have to work much more for an overtake, but it also meant that with the increased battery output, it is actually not so difficult to keep the guy behind, right? So Piastri was a great example, because Leclerc with a new wing, was always trying very hard to get behind. And, at the end of the straight, for example, he would not be close enough, but maybe only 8-7 tenths behind, but then, Piastri would be able, to deploy the battery, especially through the first sector. He will be 1.4, 1.5 seconds behind. Then Leclerc would get to about 0.9, 0.8, 0.7, even 0.6 at the end of the straight, but not, close enough to, for example, be able to challenge for the lead. Unless you were Mercedes, who for the first time, Russell overtook Antonelli, at about lap 7, but then they got overtaken back and on lap 8, and that was quite interesting, when that happened, because for the first time you could see that the fire between the Mercedes drivers, is really starting to ignite, as they obviously will be fighting for the World Championship. Maybe, hopefully, we will join them. We definitely hope so, but we have to make sure that we are clear of some crazy drivers like Verstappen, who at the same time, when Antonelli, 19 years old, a teenager, obviously, repairing the reputation of the teenage drivers, nicely getting past Russell, Verstappen just forgot to brake again into the turn 12 at the end of the back straight, force Hamilton wide, as he so often did. Oh my God, we went crazy, especially given what happened when we were racing in the Concurrent 2020-25 season, which you will find out in June. And of course, it then meant that we lost the chance to fight the Mercedes. Why? Because Verstappen had to give the place back, but he wanted to give it back right before the detection zone for the overtake. Remember, no more DRS, it is the SM straight mode now, now. So that basically what it means is that you get to overtake, when you can use 1 megajoules of energy for the whole lap, which should allow you to overtake, the car in front of you at the, different places of the track. And of course, Hamilton, wanted to have that overtake, not Verstappen, so they got slowed down, bang, 3-5 seconds gone, and pretty much that would be the fight over as far, of course, as, fight for, the 4th and 5th place would be concerned. So it was terrible. Verstappen in the end got in the overtook Hamilton, who then kind of dropped back a little bit. He was obviously struggling with overheating, but I have to say, for Hamilton, it was critical when he had a chance to have a go at the Mercedes that he overtook Russell. Why? Because Antonelli was cutting the corners so much that he actually got penalized. He's gotten a 5-second penalty. So Antonelli, dropping back in the end at the end of the race to the 6th. And Hamilton would have then be promoted to 4th, which would be acceptable for us because we would outscore Mercedes-Benz. We still do not quite consider McLaren to be our main challengers. So what of Leclerc, right? Our Monaco sprints. He would be going after Piastri, but again made a little mistake, just like Verstappen, on purpose outbrake himself. Here, Leclerc tried very hard at the, I believe it was lap 18, and that really, halted his challenge because at the time he was 7 tenths behind, and if he would have gotten through that kind of that clumsy section when I'm so mega, obviously going over the crest and underneath the highway, obviously leading onto the Hard Rock Stadium with the final, finish, final straight. I thought there he had a great opportunity to get Piastri, and Piastri would be able to get him back. So second place, the best he could have done. So he really should have picked up Piastri, quicker, and then really Norris, because I believe. Again, the tweaks simply meant that it will be much more difficult, I think, to overtake now. So this is something we have to look at. The overtaking is a critical part of Formula 1. We don't want to have a procession races. And hey, again, if, for example, Leclerc would have overtaken Piastri, Piastri could have overtaken him back, that would be much better than basically waiting. Is something going to happen? And pretty much you had very few overtakes for what is a great overtaking track. Again, a great place in the Miami Gardens, especially the weather is quite nice, even though who knows what will happen for a Grand Prix with even thunderstorms being predicted. So definitely stay tuned if something will be changing there. So overall, disappointing. Because again, 3rd and 4th, we could have easily turned it into 2nd, 4th, or 1 and 2nd, but had to qualify better. If we qualify better, and of course, if we were able, to really, overtake, not just follow, especially the McLarens, and of course, if, Hamilton, took his chance, and maybe if he didn't get unlucky with, obviously, his history with Verstappen, sometimes means that, that crazy Red Bull villain, we really hate him because he really destroyed, both of the drivers' races. We really want to keep away from them. So, it was a pity, that start-finish straight is so short, because otherwise Hamilton would have been, easily there, behind Leclerc in the 4th position, and at least we would have gotten 3rd and 4th, which would mean that we would pretty much outscore the Mercedes by 4 points, and it would also be good for the Drivers' Championship. So let's take a look at how the sprint finished on the Scuderia Red Regina IMAG over here, and then we will take a look at the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship, but especially at that Sprint Drivers' Championship, which is absolutely mega. And I really hope that Formula 1 will be listening to this amazing sprint race reaction from our home sweet home, so that they learn how to make it exciting through simple math. So everybody, over here, you can see Lando Norris winning a sprint again, just like he did last year. So definitely this track suits him. I would say, that uptick in performance from McLaren, track specific. Oscar Piastri in the end 3.7 seconds behind. Leclerc was right on his tails over here, and that 3rd place very, very significant for the sprint championship. Then we had 4th George Russell, 5th then Max Verstappen. He just benefited by a 10th of a second from that 5th place penalty that Antonelli got for going 4 times over the track limits. So Antonelli, championship leader, he stays as the championship leader, but lost further points, only finishing 6th. Lewis Hamilton 7th, that will hurt. 7-time champion finishing 7th. That's not what we want to see. But again, we already discussed the reason for. And Alpine pretty much emerging over here as the 5th fastest team, scoring a point. Then we have Isaac Hadjar, fighting with Colapinto, but obviously you wouldn't get any points here for the top 10 for a sprint. It's only for the top 8. So this is how it finished over here. And let's take a look at the Drivers' Championship, right? So over here you can see that the sprint makes little changes to it, right? And I believe this is why, it should be made much more interesting and exciting by having the Sprint Drivers' Championship. You should probably, I believe, still add the points, to that overall championship, right? Every race matters. You would then have 30 sessions, right? 24 races plus 6 sprints, that's great. But look at this, if you had the sprint championship, Norris here winning with 8 points, but he finished 4th in the first sprint of the season in China. So he will get 8 plus 5, 13 points. Now who finished 2nd? Piastri, right? 7 points. But he only finished 6th in China, so 7 plus 3, that would be 10 points for him. But then look at this, Charles Leclerc, he actually finished 3rd, so he got 6 points. In China though, he was right behind the winner Russell, so he would score 7 plus 6, 13 points, voila, just like Norris. But Norris would be leading, based obviously on the fact that he has won the sprint, whereas Leclerc hasn't. But then Russell, who has won the other sprint, 8 points, he finished 4th here, 8 plus 5 is 13 points. Hamilton, obviously, he finished, 3rd, so he would score 6, but now for 7th place, only 2, so only on 8 points, and Verstappen scoring no points, and obviously only 4 over here would be behind. And even Andrea Antonelli not doing well in the sprints, only 5th in Chinese sprint, so 4 points plus 6th over here, 3 points, 4 plus 3, 7 points, so even behind Lewis Hamilton, for example. And you can see how exciting it is, right? That you would have Russell and Norris like locked head in head over here. It would be interesting because I believe Russell and Norris also got in the pole position. Who would he be actually, because on a countback they would have pretty much the exact same results. So it could come down to the toss of the coin, but also Leclerc with 13 points over there. Next sprint obviously being the next race in Canada, you only need to outscore Russell and Norris and you would be leading the sprint. And hey, if the sprint is a procession, it can actually show you just how exciting it would be for the lead, right? And this is really what in Formula 1 they should be doing, because the sprint has very little effect on the Drivers' Championship. Everybody pretty much stays the same, but for the Sprint Drivers' Championship, it's very, very exciting. Just like in my very own Sprint Championship that, I'm now leading, but you can see even though I won twice, right? You can see that I only have, the lead of 3 points. So basically, I better finish, on the podium so that, I'm not equal in terms of the points by whoever is 3 points behind if I would finish 4th or lower. So we just wanted to highlight that because we believe this is obviously great over here, it actually surprising means that McLaren would be leading the Sprint Constructors Championship with 23 points from us, Scuderia Ferrari, because obviously Hamilton has 8 points, like 321. And for example, Mercedes, with 13 plus 7 from Antonelli, from Russell, obviously Antonelli, they would be 3rd on 20 points. So you can see very, very exciting in the constructors as well. Let's do it for one, God! Right, so over here, this is our Drivers' Championship, how it looks like. So Andrea Antonelli obviously lead decreased, he's on 75 points, and George Russell on 68 points, so difference of 7 points now. Charles Leclerc now only 20 points from Antonelli on 55 points. So all we need, is to make sure that Leclerc finishes ahead or wins, the Miami sprint, which I believe he has a chance if Leclerc can qualify 3rd, 2nd, or 1st, and lead, especially crucially if he can be leading into turn 1. I believe we have a good enough pace to stay there, and that could be a big victory because you don't know where Mercedes can, for example, qualify, and if let's say McLaren can split them. Lewis Hamilton stays 4th for us, Scuderia Ferrari, on 43 points now. So you can see now he's 32 points off the lead, so he can't be leading after Miami Grand Prix. 5th, reigning world champion Lando Norris, McLaren, 33 points. 6, Oscar Piastri, 28 points. 7, Oliver Bearman for Haas, 17 points. 8 is then Pierre Gasly, Alpine, 16 points. 9, Max Verstappen, Red Bull, 16 points. Pretty much the only time he was able to keep up with the frontrunners this year. We will see what happens later on in the Grand Prix. And 10, we then have Liam Lawson for Racing Bulls, 10 points. 11, Arvid Lindbergh, the only pure rookie of the season, Racing Bulls, 4 points. Isaac Hadjar, 12 for Red Bull Racing with 4 points. 13, Gabriel Bortoleto, Audi, 2 points. 14, Carlos Sainz, Williams, 2 points. 15, Esteban Ocon, Haas, 1 point. 16, Franco Colapinto, Alpine, 1 point. So pretty much stays the same. but the sprint championship would be much more interesting. 17 still without the points. Nico Hülkenberg, Audi didn't even start the sprint on 0 points. 18 then Alexander Albon Williams 0 points. 19 we then have Valtteri Bottas Cadillac 0 points. 20th Sergio Perez Cadillac 0 points. Cadillac did very well actually, especially at the beginning of the sprint, fighting out with the Williamses and Toro Rossos. Great to see the new team succeeding, and Aston Martin, it's a terrible performance. 21st Fernando Alonso 0 points. And Aston Martin, Lance Stroll 22.0 points. Again, Honda power issues, for Stroll, hardly getting any qualifying done over there. And yeah, this is really a point of concern. People are asking, and quite reasonably, what have you been doing in April? So this is the Drivers' Championship. This is the Constructors' Championship. So very, very exciting in a sprint championship. But here Mercedes easily retains the lead. They are on 143 points, and yes, I believe over here and we have 98 points, almost 100 over there. Third, McLaren, then 61 points, which also, means that after, the race, there will be pretty much 43 points on offer. So we, Mercedes will be leading into Canada, but maybe by only 2 points. If we get a 1-2 and they both DNF or stay outside of the points. Now fourth is Red Bull Racing on 20 points, just ahead of fifth, Haas 18 points. 6 is then Alpine 17 points. 7 Racing Bulls 14 points. 8 Audi 2 points. Quite a lot of issues. So they gotta fix them out. 9 Williams also quite a lot of issues. Overweight car 2 points, and 10 Cadillac 0 points. 11 Aston Martin Honda 0 points. So yeah, this is how the Constructors' Championship looks like. So little effect again due to the sprint. This is how the Drivers' Championship looks like. But again, for the sprint itself, I mean that's a lot of fun, right? So hope you enjoy over here our sprint reaction. And of course, for me, I did a fantastic job over here. And, it was so great, to see basically the title challengers, in my concurrent season going head to head, and me finally winning my maiden Miami sprint. I'm so happy. Cannot wait for the Grand Prix, you guys. As I'm chasing that second shiny golden Formula 1 Grand Prix winner trophy, wish me good luck. So this was really great. I was so happy to win because obviously what happened, in 2024, the 2024 season, when my Angel Amy was watching and Verstappen, half spun me and we both dropped to the back of the field and I will recover to 7. I'm really happy, the sprint weekends absolutely mega. And it's great because, now we can again open up the setup because the Park Ferrari is open up. So we will now go to the qualifying and hopefully qualify better as we now know how to fine tune the cars. So we can be ready for the first victory of Scuderia Ferrari, and no place better than the beautiful, colorful Miami, here in the Miami Gardens on the outskirts of the Hard Rock Stadium featuring the lovely Miami Marina. Guys, it's all set up for Scuderia Ferrari. We love racing, we love Formula 1, we love Ferrari. Forza Ferrari!